Hello everyone. I don't know why I didn't do this topic sooner. I am doing this topic today because it has been requested by a couple subscribers, and honestly, I just thought that nobody would be even interested in hearing my story. But today I'm going to take you through kind of my whole origin story. I want to talk about everything that I've studied in the occult community. I'm going to take you all the way from childhood to teenage years to adulthood. For reference, I am now in my early to mid 30s. I don't want to disclose my exact age, but I have been practicing now for about 20 years. So I want to kind of take you through the entire origin story, but I was really surprised that people were even interested in this video topic. I think it makes sense though, because I have made over 100 videos now. I think I'm on like 110 or 120, maybe 150, I can't even remember. And when you're watching videos from someone, you kind of want to know who they are and like where they come from, where they get their information. Are they credible? Are they not credible? That is up for you to decide. And so I get it. You want to know who the person is behind the scenes or the mask or whatever it is. But if we're doing this, I'm taking you all the way back to the beginning. So if you're brand new to my channel, I'm a chaos magician, a witch, a psychic, a shamanic practitioner. I have a history with Zen Buddhism and ceremonial magic. So I've done a lot of different things in the occult community. And my story is really a story of loneliness and isolation that led to spiritual transformation. And I'll spare you the gory details of the loneliness and isolation part. I'll go into that a little bit, but this isn't going to be a fest of me just divulging my entire life of childhood trauma to you. But I do want to at least set the stage of who I was from a child, because it very much pertains to how I operated throughout my entire magical career. So as a lot of witches will express, as a child, I felt odd, I felt different, I didn't feel like I quite fit in with anybody. My dad would always tell me that he would oftentimes find me in the corner of a room, like when I was a baby, I would be in the corner of a room talking to someone that wasn't there. So I had a lot of communication with spirits from a very young age, and it really creeped my dad out. It was really creepy, according to him. I didn't think it was creepy, and honestly, I have no recollection of this anymore, but there was definitely something there from an early age. And we have some intuitive psychic abilities in the family as well. One of my grandmas was actually a Rosicrucian and part of a secret order. All I know is that she was part of that order. I don't know anything about the order because what they did was a total secret. But there was like a little bit of psychicness and intuition in the family by way of other grandparents, etc. I ended up growing up in two households. So one household was very Christian, one household was very atheist. Both houses had massive turmoil and childhood trauma for very different reasons. And so the story kind of starts out with this loneliness and this isolation for three reasons. I think I've narrowed it down to three reasons why I felt lonely and isolated. The first reason being childhood trauma. Of course, that'll do that to a child. Definitely not getting into that on this video. The second one is the primary household that I lived in. I grew up in a really small town, and the house that I lived in was on the outskirts of a small town. I wasn't even in the small town with the other kids. I was on the outskirts. We had acreage, we had a barn, we had everything, but we had no neighbors that were my own age. I could not just walk to a friend's house. It was not easy to have people over. And I didn't have any full siblings either. So it was literally just me alone in my room reading. I wasn't allowed to watch too much TV. We didn't have internet access when I was younger. I'm talking like early teens right now. And so I spent most of my time in my room alone reading, especially during the summers. I would just come out to eat food and that's it. And then I would go back in my room and read for days on end because there was nothing else to do. I didn't have a cell phone. There wasn't internet. I couldn't have my friends over. Wasn't really allowed to watch TV. I mean, what else do you do but sit with your books? And the third reason why I felt isolated and lonely, and I hesitate to bring this one up, my fiance told me not to bring this one up because they said I might come off as a pompous ass or some sort of arrogance, mate. I don't know. So I'm just gonna say this with a grain of salt. I don't think I'm special. Okay, let me just put that out there. I think a lot of people in the occult community can resonate with this. But the third reason why I felt lonely and isolated is because what I thought about on a daily basis was not anything similar to my peers at school. Sure, I had friends, but I didn't feel like anybody knew me or understood me on a deep level. I was always contemplating death. I was contemplating the existence of life. I was reading about different religions. I was reading the Christian Bible along with other religious texts from Eastern traditions. So I was really trying to broaden my mind from a very young age, learning about different religions and different forms of spirituality, which wasn't really encouraged in either household I lived in, because in the super Christian household, of course, only Christianity can prevail. And then in the atheist household, I was made fun of for reading anything. If I brought in the Christian Bible because I truly wanted to understand the text, I was made fun of for giving into the dogma. I was always encouraged in that household to never give in to the dogma, which totally plays into my chaos magic heart later on in life. But I digress. I couldn't really relate to my peers at school because I also wasn't being challenged academically. There was an option for me when I was in it was either second grade or third grade or something like that. I tested as a more gifted student. We didn't have any gifted schools anywhere near the small town that I grew up in, and we didn't even have private schools. And even if we did have private schools, my parents could not afford that anyways. So I can't remember if it was a teacher or the principal, it was somebody, but they suggested skipping a grade, either skipping second grade or skipping third grade, so I could be a little bit more academically challenged. However, my parents did not want to do that because they valued the social development, the social aspect of things. They wanted me to stay with kids my own age, and I understand that. However, it led to a frustrating feeling of not being able to relate to anybody because what other people were interested in, I was not interested in. And again, I wasn't being challenged academically. It led to this whole shadow, which I'm not going to go, again, not going to go deep into that in this video. When I do a video about psychological archetypes, I may talk about the shadow a little bit more, but there was this shadow that developed of me feeling like wasted potential, of me feeling like I truly could have done something magnificent with my life if I had been given the resources from a young age, but it just wasn't available. In the town that I grew up in, with the finances, you know, where my parents were at money-wise, it just wasn't doable. And so that, me not being academically challenged, led to me becoming extremely lazy and not even trying and not even caring about school. And I wonder where I would have been if I had been challenged and had been excited to learn. So there is that aspect. And again, my fiance was like, don't say that. Don't say that you were a gifted child or whatever because it makes you seem pompous. And please know that I'm not sharing this to pretend like I'm special or like I'm better than anybody. I think there are so many other kids and adults that have gone through this and they just feel like they can't relate to their peers. And I wanted to include that part in this story because it's so crucial to why I ended up going into the world of the occult and the world of witchcraft and all of those things. So I was bored. I was lonely. I was isolated, reading books in my room with no one to talk to for days on end, no siblings to play with, nothing like that. So around my early teens, I would say maybe like 12 to 13, 14, somewhere around there. I don't know the exact age because, you know, who remembers that kind of stuff, but that is when I first started dabbling in witchcraft. And it was kind of one of those things where because I was in a small town, it was so hard to get information. I mean, I would go to the library and there would maybe be one book on witchcraft, maybe, if that. Or I had to go online and like special order it. You know, you could get on the computers at the library and you special order certain books in because your small town doesn't even have the books that you want. So it was tough to find books. It was tough to find anything on it really, but I started practicing witchcraft from a young age. I quickly was introduced to Wicca because this was during the time where Wicca was very predominant, right? I mean, Wicca was like taking over the scene and everybody was Wiccan. Every book was written with a Wiccan flair, and I didn't particularly like that. I didn't resonate with it on any level. I didn't like the matron and patron goddess system. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it just wasn't for me, right? It just didn't resonate with me. So I never became Wiccan. I dabbled in witchcraft, but I never actually went the Wiccan route. I just decided it wasn't for me. And so then later in my late teen years, so let's say maybe 17, 18, 19, somewhere around there, 16 maybe, I don't know, late teen years, that is when I started getting into ceremonial magic. And pretty much all of the information that I found came from Reddit, which Reddit is the worst place to get information. Sometimes it's the best and the worst, but people are trolls and people are mean. So I found a lot of my information on Reddit. It basically started out with me being an armchair magician. So I was reading about a lot of different ancient grimoires, trying to figure out which magical system really called out to me the most. And so for a long time, I was just an armchair magician because I was just doing the research, but not actually doing the practices. I just wanted to read about these historical texts. I wanted to learn these hidden truths. And then I stumbled upon the Golden Dawn. So the Golden Dawn was my first exposure as an actual practicing magician, where I started at the very beginning stages with the Golden Dawn. I started learning Hebrew, at least the basics of Hebrew. I started doing the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram every morning and every night. I started to learn how to do some scrying methods. I started to get into astrology and planetary magic, so learning about the planets and their energies. And I started getting into tarot during this time, although for a brief period in time, and then I ended up taking a break from tarot, but I digress. I tried to go deeper into ceremonial magic practices, and I really tried to experiment. But what ultimately made me leave the ceremonial magic scene is two reasons. The first reason is I couldn't get over my atheism and my skepticism. I didn't have any desire to work with angels and demons, and I feel like a lot of ceremonial magic is working with angels and demons and other spirits. And for me, because I was an atheist at the time, I couldn't get past my skepticism. Anything that I was doing, I couldn't believe in the validity of it. So that was the first reason. And then the second reason was that women were treated like crap. Women were treated terribly in the ceremonial magic scene, especially, what is this, like 15 years ago or something? I think it's gotten better now, but I think it also is still a problem today. It was just so... Anytime that I encountered a man in the ceremonial magic scene, no offense to all the male magicians out there, because I'm sure you're lovely now, but 15 years ago, when I was a young teenage girl trying to learn this, people would be demeaning, they would be condescending, I would have to constantly prove my intelligence, which was extremely frustrating for me because I had this shadow already of me not being able to exercise my full capacity when it comes to intelligence, and so to have people question me and to talk down on me really hit a wound from my childhood that pissed me off, and I didn't want to be there anymore. I think there's a third reason why I left ceremonial magic, because I was really getting into Hermetic Kabbalah as well, which makes sense. Golden Dawn, Hermetic Kabbalah, kind of can't do Golden Dawn without getting into Kabbalah in the first place. But when I was attempting to learn the basics of Hebrew and when I was learning about Hermetic Kabbalah, first of all, it's an incredible practice, but I personally did not feel connected to it whatsoever because it is not part of my culture. It is not part of my heritage. And I felt weird. I honestly felt weird learning Hebrew and chanting these things that I had absolutely no personal connection to. And so I just felt like it wasn't for me. I felt like it just wasn't the space for me to be in. So I left the ceremonial magic scene, and then I just went into a hardcore atheist science route for a long time. I didn't believe in anything. I went deep into psychology. This is also the time where I started deep diving into my more mundane studies, so I became a healthcare practitioner. I'm not going to disclose what type of healthcare practitioner, but I will say that I worked in the musculoskeletal department, so I'll leave that up for you to figure out. I really got into nutrition and had a very brief moment as a nutritionist, and I was really deep diving into the sciences, and ultimately psychology was my true love, and I really got into Carl Jung. I really loved him. So psychology was my biggest influence during this time. And then now, as present day, some of you already know that I'm going to school right now again because I'm in and out of school for the rest of my life, but I'm currently double majoring in molecular biosciences and psychology. So psychology and psychological research as it pertains to trauma and rewiring the brain and spirituality and marrying science and magic together, that is what I'm so deeply invested in. Then I hit a point where around 25, I had a massive spiritual awakening. I mean, totally massive. Everything came up for me, and this also corresponds to the time when your prefrontal cortex develops as a human being and you start actually having these realizations about your life and being able to think more critically and rationally. So around that time, I had a huge spiritual awakening, which led me to Zen Buddhism. So I ended up having a Zen Buddhism phase for about 5 years. It was deeply impactful. It was probably the most impactful part of my entire occult practice was the period where I was a Zen Buddhist. I learned about altered states of consciousness. I learned about meditations. I was meditating every single day. I had a family friend who was my advisor during this time. So my family friend was an ex-Tibetan monk. So he was a monk in a monastery for 7 years. And he had told me that at the 7-year mark, he basically had to decide whether he wanted to stay here for life or whether he wanted to come home. And he ultimately decided that he wanted to come home to the United States. And we met through my parents, and he ended up kind of becoming some sort of, I don't know, spiritual advisor to me. So he helped me with my meditations. He answered my questions anytime I had questions. He ended up switching because there's a bunch of different branches of Buddhism. And when he got back home to the United States, Zen Buddhism is really where he felt like he fit the best. And so I was asking him a lot of questions about it, and it fit very well at the time for me coming out of atheism and having this spiritual awakening. Zen Buddhism just fit like a glove in that moment. So that is where I gained a lot of my knowledge from meditation and altered states of consciousness, and also just being interested in psychology in general. That was really supplemental to my meditations. I had a lot of incredible experiences in my meditations, and it really helped me through so much shadow work, studying Carl Jung's teachings and also going through these meditations and having a spiritual awakening all at the same time. I felt like a completely new person by the time I turned 26. The reason why I left Zen Buddhism is because at a certain point, I felt like I wanted to honor the animal within, because for me, Zen Buddhism and this is just for me, I know that some Buddhists may disagree, and that's fine. For me, it was a little bit too much detachment, and I wanted to feel immensely attached to the animal that I was. I wanted to get into my most primitive self rather than only communing with my higher self, if that makes sense. I felt like I had a good relationship with my higher self, but I felt like the animal was a little bit neglected. And so that is what led me back into paganism and witchcraft. I was really drawn back into paganism because it was so earthy, and I felt like I could honor the animal within. And then of course paganism, you know, bringing me back into witchcraft, and after all this time realizing that Wicca wasn't really dominating the scene anymore. I feel like maybe eclectic witchcraft was starting to rise at that point, and I was able to practice witchcraft without the Wiccan influence. And then I started my shamanic studies. So at this point in time, I don't know if I'm going to include all that in this video. I will say that I went into a bunch of shamanic studies. I did a couple courses. I read tons of books. I had tons of meditations. I discovered my power animal. That was a whole process that also took many, many meditations to actually connect with my power animal and figure out what my power animal even is. I had a soul retrieval done on me. I met some of my spirit guides. It was just this deeply spiritual time when I was in that shamanic phase. But because shamanism is so controversial, I'm not really going to talk about that a lot in this video. I think instead what I'm going to do is just do a whole series on shamanism. I will say in this video though, I would never ever call myself a shaman. Ever. I would never call myself an actual shaman, because to me, a shaman needs to be initiated by an indigenous tribe or an indigenous group, and I have not been initiated. This is all just self-exploration, and I have not earned that title of shaman, so just putting that out there. And then all the while, of course, I'm working on my psychic abilities, and there are some periods where I completely shut it off because I didn't want to deal with it, sometimes where it was turned on way too much and I couldn't ignore it anymore, and then we finally come to chaos magic. So I would say in the last 5 years or so is when I finally discovered chaos magic. Maybe it's been like 6 years now or something like that. Anyways, so when I discovered chaos magic, that's where I feel like my occult practice absolutely exploded, because chaos magic gave me this freedom to be completely as all over the place as I wanted to be, because paradigm jumping is encouraged. And I had realized after finding chaos magic that this is something that I was doing the entire time. Using your belief as a tool for manifestation, your belief in something is what makes it real. I already had these perceptions from my atheist heart to my psychological heart. It was something that just really appealed to me, because I was basically practicing witchcraft from a psychological perspective anyways. And so moving from Zen Buddhism to practicing witchcraft from the psych model into chaos magic was just absolutely seamless. And then for the past 5 to 6 years, I feel like my mind has been opened to so many new possibilities. And I think I've already talked about this on my channel in a couple other videos, but chaos magic allowed me to be free. I mean, if you've seen, there's one video I did on my channel, it's titled something like I tried vampiric magic for 6 months or something like that. And then there's another video I did where my journey with Thoth, here's what happened, or something like that. Chaos magic really allowed me to experiment like the mad scientist that I always knew that I was. The mad scientist archetype is so incredibly important to me, and that is the lens that I view myself through when I am an occultist, when I am doing things here at this desk. I was able to explore different paradigms like vampiric magic for 6 months, doing a deep dive into that, and then exploring things in pop culture and what have you. Any sort of magical paradigm that I could get my hands on and sink my teeth into, I was doing it. During this time, I also started deity work for kind of the first time ever, really, because even when I was doing ceremonial magic, I couldn't really connect with any sort of higher power, and that was one of the reasons why I left, because I couldn't get over my skepticism. And chaos magic really pushed me to question my atheism and to maybe realize maybe I'm more of a pantheist. Maybe I'm more of an animist. Maybe I'm a polytheist and a monotheist. Maybe they all exist in different dimensions of thought, and depending on which dimension I want to live in for the day, I can be that. So today I'm a polytheist, tomorrow I'm a pantheist, which is like totally chaos magic of me to say, I know, but it gave me this freedom to really flip back and forth between all of these paradigms for whatever suited my purpose and my energy for the actual day. So during this chaos magic period, I started working with Medusa pretty heavily. I flirted with the Morrigan and Cridwen, and there's a couple other deities that I flirted with as well. I started in the past 6 months working with the Horn God and Thoth, so those are the 2 deities that I am currently working with. By the way, as an update on Thoth, one of the most magical experiences of my life. That's a whole nother another. I'm gonna update you guys in another video about my situation with both. And then the pandemic hit. Oh, good old panini. At the time of filming this, it has been about 3.5 years since the pandemic, and I was already into chaos magic at that point, practicing witchcraft, you know, doing a bunch of different things. I had struggled with depression pretty much my entire life. For as long as I can remember, I've been depressed. I credit that to the loneliness and isolation and childhood trauma and many other things. And I don't know why it never dawned on me to use magic for my depression. It's so silly to me. It's something I had struggled with my entire life, yet I never took the time to actually do a spell or a ritual to fix the problem. I guess I just didn't think that magic could fix depression. I thought that I was just stuck with it for life. And so during the pandemic, that's when I started to go hardcore into fixing my depression with magic, because why not? I have nothing to lose at this point. And I've been asked many times to share what exactly I did for my depression, because I did actually end up curing my depression. I cured my lifelong depression with witchcraft, which is incredible. And I consider that an absolute miracle, because I was already into psychology, okay? I had gone to therapy for years. I had done my shadow work. I understood brain structures and how my brain was working. I understood why I was the way I was. I just couldn't move past the depression. It felt to me just like a full-on chemical imbalance that I had zero control over. I had fixed things in my life. I had done gratitude journals. I did everything and nothing worked. And so to cure my depression with magic was an absolute miracle. And so yeah, I've been asked to share that on a video, and I have talked about it in my Q&As. I have talked about what I did. Ultimately, just to keep it really brief, I ended up creating a servitor that would help me with my depression. I also did crystal grids, so I did crystal gridding, and I created a whole ritual for myself to do every single new moon and every single full moon that focused more on the energies that I wanted versus the energies that I didn't want, if that makes sense. But I don't think I want to do a video on that because, one, there's way too much liability. Two, it's so personal. It's so personal because what works for me probably won't work for another person. And three, like, there's so much backstory of how I got there in the first place. It's just a complicated video to make, and I just don't want to subject myself to the trolls because it's such a sensitive part of my life that I don't really want to offer that up for public consumption, to have someone watch a video about it and then dissect every little thing that I said. I don't think I could personally handle that. I can handle the trolls for the most part, but on certain subjects like that, I would just like to not subject myself to that. But ultimately, the reason why I'm telling you this is because that is what really deepened my relationship with witchcraft. I mean, one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. It's been 3.5 years and my depression has not come back since. And let me tell you, if it were coming back, it would have. So yeah, that brings us up to present day. I am still a chaos magician. I'm still a witch. I am still a shamanic practitioner and a psychic. I'm sure I missed something in there. I'm sure there's many instances throughout my whole magical career where if you ask me something, oh, have you ever done this? I'll probably be like, oh yeah, that's right, I did that at some point or whatever. It's hard to remember all the like little stuff, you know what I mean? But anyways, that's my origin story. I hope it was interesting. I don't see this video performing well, honestly. I don't see that many people actually being interested in hearing my story, or at least when I started with my childhood, people probably clicked off the video by then. When I started all the way back at childhood, they were like, yeah, I'm not gonna listen to that. So if you're still here, I appreciate you so much. Definitely let me know. And I will see you all in another video soon.